Keys to the Commonwealth, a podcast where we share the real stories of local community members who are using real estate to build personal wealth, along with tips and tricks from professionals across the industry. And now, your host, Landry Fields.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Keys to the Commonwealth podcast. I work every day with real estate investors and professionals, ensuring their portfolios, and I'm very excited for today's guest. He's the owner of Burton Properties LLC for 28 years, along with being a partner in several other LLCs in the Kentucky area. Born and raised in Roanoke, Virginia, he received his degree from Virginia Tech and is married to his beautiful bride of 38 years, Maribeth. I am very excited to welcome my friend Dave Burton today to the Keys to the Commonwealth studio, who is such a seasoned real estate investor and a wealth of knowledge. I know you're really going to enjoy this. Dave, thanks for coming on the show.
Well, thank you, Landry.
So like we like to start out every episode, hop back in the 1980s DeLorean and tell me, how did you get into real estate to begin with?
Well, we were living and working at Northwestern University in Chicago and really unable to buy a house in that area on our own, but we were able to finagle a duplex, which we had some folks living upstairs and we lived down, and it kind of made it work. And so when we left there to move down here to Lexington, we had some capital left over.
Sure.
And so that gave me some seed money to start in some real estate.
One of the original house hacking methods that I think is more vital today that I tell a lot of young people, I mean, maybe you can't afford a house straight up, but if you can find a duplex or something where you can offset some of those costs with income, that's a great way to start out, for sure.
Yeah, in those days it was 10% interest, so that made it a little more challenging than what we see today.
It might be back to there before we know it. Who knows? We'll see. So outside of that one, here in the local area of Kentucky, what was your kind of first investment property you purchased, and how did you kind of finance that deal?
Actually, it was a single-family house that we bought, and frankly, it never did that great. It was in the early 90s. It just kind of sat there, little bit of cash flow. I was able to buy it really because my income was not high enough, but my father-in-law signed on with me to make it work, became a partner.
Yeah.
And so that was that. It sat there for about 5 years, never did too much, paid it down a little bit. But in 93 is when we really more in earnest. I had sold that property and was looking for something else and came across some property at the University of Kentucky. And that kind of started, if you will, Burton Properties sort of at that point.
Still kind of more of a part-time scenario at that point in time.
It was definitely more a part-time scenario, but I enjoy, you don't have to be great or enjoy construction to be in rental property, but I happen to. I enjoy building things, developing things, designing things, seeing it go from kind of junk to something that you can be proud to say you own. So I enjoy that whole process, and that's exactly what that first one was. And when it was finished, it looked good, and it had some pretty good cash flow. And I thought to myself, I think I'll do this again.
That seems to be a common trend with real estate investors. It seems like a lot of times when we get into it, and I'm trying, as I've mentioned on here, to get into it with my first one. And so got some things on the table. We'll see, cross our fingers. But what has it been as far as that? What are some of the benefits of it, or things that you've learned along the way as far as investing in real estate and using it to kind of build wealth or passive income?
Well, I didn't use it necessarily. I was more interested in passive income. Wasn't necessarily looking exactly at the wealth
Sure.
aspect of it, but that does come with the territory.
Sure.
Just over time, it's usually for most people kind of a get-rich slow path, as a lot of investors will know. But once you find your niche, you kind of reinvest those returns and then pick a pace that you can get longevity out of.
Yeah.
A lot of times. Sometimes people realize it's just not for them. I get that. But other times people just get in over their head. They're inundated. They're working basically 2 or 3 jobs.
Yeah. And
I can't do this. But they've just probably picked a little too fast a pace to really keep it up.
Sure. And it's easy to look at some things and think, oh, passive income, so it means it must be a passive type of job. But I'm sure you could attest to that. It's far from that.
Yeah, in fact, I would say it's just the opposite. Probably if you go in looking at it as a job, then you'll probably not be so concerned about it when it becomes that sometimes.
Right.
But generally, time is your friend with real estate. So if you can hold it longer, things will just kind of trend in the right directions usually. Yeah.
And I think for me in this, and I think for a lot of people, like you kind of mentioned, with the idea of the word wealth there, but that I think takes on a different meaning depending on the person. And my goal in some respects of it, I'm sure yours was, as far as more passive income, is more of just time. So like time being a part of that wealth aspect and getting your time back and to be invested in family or other things in life as well type of scenarios. So not just an actual dollar sign type of thing with that. So
I did manage most of my property early on.
Yeah.
And then within about 6-7 years, when it got to a certain spot, I was able to hire someone to look after it. And that freed me up. It cost me some money, but it freed me up to keep developing.
yeah, when I'm with any job, it's always kind of like at a certain point, there's a breaking point, right? A glass ceiling kind of thing. If you want to keep growing, if you want to keep moving, sometimes, you got to, and I've done that with some of my businesses and stuff like that. And it's a good problem to have for sure, but it doesn't mean it's not easy and so forth. So, I mean, if someone, I've started kind of down that road and process, or others that might be looking to, sometimes I think in this market, they think, oh, well, the best deals are gone or it's too late and so forth. If someone's wanting to get into real estate investing, what kind of advice would you have for them? Or if you were having coffee with them, what would you tell them?
Well, I would say it is a little more difficult right now. There's a lot of people chasing after property, it feels like, and there's not as many deals. But, it's cyclical, so it'll come back around in time. And there are great deals out there. You may have to search for them in the field a little bit further to find them. They're not going to drop in your lap.
I'm just going to pop up on Zillow and
No, and that's where, that really is where you become an expert on an area and get to know it well, and all of a sudden you even start making personal inquiries into properties next doors to your. I bought several properties where I've got to know the owner next door. Whenever you sell, let me know. I'd like to buy it.
Yeah.
And eventually it might take a year, it might take 10 years, but they come back and. So that it's out there.
I assume you would test the relational part of it is probably one of the biggest factors and keys in real estate and portfolio or financing and all those types of scenarios.
Well, yes, it is, though. In real estate, some people say every property's for sale if the price is right. So there is a certain sense that people don't have the emotional connection to it like they would their own homes. So you just have to determine what the price is, whether you can do something better than the previous owner has done to push the rents.
So as it stands now, what does your current kind of investment portfolio look like today, 2022?
About 2/3 of it is still in the campus area, maybe just a little less
Campus
than that.
being University of Kentucky?
University of Kentucky campus area and Ashland Park through that area. And then from there it diverges into a lot of commercial properties that I own, usually with other partners.
Okay.
And then that's been the trend for the last 10 years or so.
So the commercial, 10 years ago is when you kind of started jumping into the commercial space then?
That's about right, yeah.
Okay. How's that been different, obviously? I mean, and they're vastly different in some ways, but it's a new challenge, like you look, in some respects, and it seems like it's an always evolving market depending on what's going on with either the local area, what's going around it for development or the economy.
It's definitely more tricky, I will say that. It's a feast or famine. Is what I've watched in commercial real estate. If it works really well.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't work, you're really kind of carrying that thing because not anybody can come along and rent that 20,000 square feet. You have to find the right tenant. But it's been really good as of, in the last few years.
So what was it about the college student housing, or did that kind of just develop unintentionally that way into kind of your portfolio, starting out in a big way based around the college, university, and student housing, or kind of renting to students scenario, or was that intentional?
Yes and no. I was out searching for a property, came across a property on the campus, and I ran the numbers and looked at it and thought, that looks pretty good.
Yeah.
And what I began doing in those years particularly is I had basically a formula I was looking at. I wanted things that were within walking distance to the university, things that could be redeveloped or improved dramatically, because I had the skills to do that. And so I came up with a formula because I did not have the income to afford, just buying anything. I had to find the right property that I could go and put money into, draw that money back out, and move on to the next property. That was just the situation I was in. So that's what you had to do. Like I said, for most people, though, I did not go there particularly. I didn't go ahead of time saying, oh, this is where I want to be. It's just I found it, or it found me, and it's like, this works, and I'll go with it. Other people find other niches around Lexington that they feel good about, and just roll with it.
Because in some ways it's kind of interesting because it's like obviously usually single family homes for the most part in that from my experience down there, but it almost, I guess, cash flows are kind of, you have to think of it more of like a fourplex or a multiplex kind of thought process, I guess, really in some ways, right? Because you're doing individual contracts with individual families or students for so many beds within rooms in the house, right?
Right, yeah. But it's mostly duplexes, triplexes, sixplex, or single family. It's kind of whatever the area will bear.
Are there any specific rules as far as in Lexington or surrounding, as far as the difference between campus or renting out a single family home to multiple tenants kind of a scenario, or is it?
There are rules there, and they have to be looked after, and those have developed over the last 20 years. Some of the things that were built down on campus and some of the neighborhoods, I can see why people would be upset, and that caused some rules to happen.
Okay.
And I was actually a part of some committees making decisions about, what as we as property owners can live with, what can we not, what would kill our business, and what would, we can do that, and make sure there's plenty of parking for people, things like that.
Obviously, most investors are obviously concerned with, the rate of return or getting into the game. That's obviously number one focus most of the time. Obviously, your cash on cash. Talk a little bit about cash on cash return, what that is, what's a good return as far as somebody getting into the game, and so forth.
That's an interesting question. What's a good return? That's one of the main questions I get asked. But, honestly, I struggle with that because what I look for in return is varied over the years. It's not always been the same for me.
Yeah.
I've gotten more selective over time, for example. So I want really good return if I want to do this. I would have taken much less when I started out.
Yeah.
So you've got that personal. That's kind of up to you. What works for you? When I got my first property, I was making enough to make a car payment with it, and I was like, "That's fantastic." That actually pays for my car. So that's the return I want.
Right.
I say get into it, and if you're pleased with what you're making on it, if you say, "Man, this is good," then turn around and keep repeating that. That's what I would say. If you really just and again, that's partly doing your research as well and figuring out what kind of return will I get in here and deciding, is that worth my time or not? So look at it a little bit more like that.
So in general, I assume that's also changed with the economy and different things over the years too, because it seems like everything's squeezed a lot more right now than, it was 10 years ago or whatnot and so forth.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that's changing by market demand. So you're going to have to decide, can I live with that? Or, I've told a lot of people, it used to be that, when you bought a rental property, you assumed you weren't going to make anything for the first 15 years. You were just going to make which often happened when you've got 10% interest rate. That's, you just make your payments and that was it. It was later that you actually began to get cash flow.
Interesting.
So these days, most people are trying to get cash flow, and at 3 or 4% interest, if you can't get it there, I would be pretty leery.
Gotcha. Yeah. They're still there right now, so it's a matter of finding the properties and hopefully getting in on that. And of course, rents are going up too. It seems like, especially this year, I've heard scenarios of 5 to 10% potentially increases still on rents over the last 12 months and continuing. So I'm sure that's an ever evolving thing, especially where the economy is right now. But
Can I make a comment again about first time investors? I would really encourage them to really think about their risk tolerance and talk that over with their wife and figure out exactly what I feel good about.
Yeah.
And then, as I mentioned, it's like owning a small business. For most people, I would encourage them to find an area, get to become an expert on that area if they can, one little niche of the community. So when something comes up or it's about to come on the market, right away, that's good. You don't have to pull out your calculator and start figuring it out. Most times than not, you will miss that property. If it's that good, it'll be gone.
Yeah, if you don't know your numbers and what you want on a return and what you can do for it,
I would encourage people, too, to realize you need capital and lending ability when you go out to buy a property, typically. And if you don't have that, you just need to partner up with someone who does.
Yeah.
It could be a parent, it could be someone older who's got cash sitting in the bank at 0.5%. And they're like, I would go in with you. Or they have the ability to sign their name and get a mortgage.
Yeah.
So if you don't have those things, which I didn't, find someone that will work with you and go that route until you get strong enough where you can do it on your own.
Yeah, and that's a great point. I mean, I think some people are just afraid to, like you said, I don't have the capital or something like that. And I think in business, I think the lesson I talk to, some of my agents or so forth all the time is that relationally, people are willing to help. You just got to ask for it, type of thing, and what's the hurt of asking? I mean, it's just if it's a simple no, then that's all it is. You move, it didn't hurt your relationship, I don't think, in that respect. And so people are a lot more willing to help if you just ask or kind of,
And they're looking as well. People my age particularly, they're seeing their returns on things very low. So if someone brings something their way and it's a good deal, they'll be ready to jump. And that makes for, you don't want a partner who just has the same abilities and strengths that you do. It's good to find someone who has what you don't have, and you need each other, and that makes for a pretty good partnership.
Any interesting? I know there's always one of my favorite questions with real estate, but any interesting stories or things that have happened in the real estate business as far as, unexpected surprises or?
It's funny, my main manager, we laughed at, there's rarely anything that actually happens these days that we haven't seen before.
Sure.
But when it does, we usually get on the phone and say, can you, here, listen to this one.
We thought we had seen it all, but.
Yeah, exactly. One thing is that I remember one of the very first properties. I was about 30 years old, maybe, and I was basically handing the keys to this group of 4 girls at a property down Rose Street. And here's your keys, and this old lady walks up and starts talking to me and explains how, this is my property. I bought this at an auction. And I'm standing there with them, and they're looking at me, and I'm looking at her, and I'm like, what?
Oh, no.
And we all kind of panicked a little bit there, and the lady had the wrong address, so it all kind of worked out. But
for a split second.
For about 30 minutes, we actually, should we move our stuff in or not?
Oh, no.
So, anyway.
Obviously, there are good days, there are hard days in the industry, even in passive income type of scenarios or real estate investing. What goes through your mind as far as on hard days to kind of keep moving forward, keep doing what you're doing, or kind of bring new energy to the drive to it? Yeah,
and some days we have more hard days, it feels like, than easy. But one thing, a couple of things I do, practically speaking, I count my blessings on the days where things look like they're all falling apart and say, don't look at what I don't have, look at what I do have. Another thing is, I often quote is, if this were easy, everybody would be doing it.
Oh, yeah.
So the fact that this is tough, and we're grown boys here, and we just have to power through it.
Yeah, I remind myself of that all the time. I mean, if anything was easy that you see people doing or they've become successful in, that's usually not the case that it was easy. There's always a lot of hard work, blood, sweat, and tears kind of scenario behind that for sure. One more conversations. I mean, we don't have to go deep into it at all, but you kind of mentioned one of your side hobbies was flipping property in Eastern Kentucky type of side of thing. What kind of led to that, or what's been kind of the interest there with that as far as land goes?
I was looking for land about 15 years ago, hunting or recreational property for our family, and a friend of mine who became a partner, and we just began going around Eastern Kentucky looking at different properties. He knew a ton more than I did. It was a good partnership. I may have a little more gray hair than he did, but he had the ability to go out there and press the flesh and really meet people and find the good deals. And so we bought property, and we would do things to it to improve it oftentimes, and then we sell it for a little bit more than we bought it for. But it was pretty reminiscent of flipping properties, but it wasn't nearly as hard.
Sure. So actual properties with like dwellings on them, houses, or more like
usually
land?
It's raw land.
Okay.
Anywhere from 100 to 400 acres.
What's kind of the difference in purchasing raw land in some respects versus, is there anything that
it's easier and harder. I mean, it's easier in the sense that there's only so many things you might do. You might fix the road up and bring it in, make it nicer, clean up some trash, get some fencing back up, things like that, which are not huge to do. But the legal side of it's where the challenge is, to search deeds and make sure that your legal person gets it right.
As far as what, like the plat and the aspect of the boundaries of everything like that.
Most times things are not surveyed. So
especially in rural areas where, it's probably been passed down to generations and so forth type of thing.
Right, yeah. So figuring out what you're buying, and oftentimes the sellers, they would maybe be in Ohio, had been there once as a child. They didn't know the boundaries either. So you had to work, through what you could with the deeds, and then work with neighboring properties to make sure you're all settled before you buy something. So.
Yeah. Very good. So when you're not selling real estate, you got any unique hobbies that you and Maribeth do or you personally do?
I'm around the house a lot. It seems like I love history, so I'm usually watching or reading something with history. We like to get out and day hike, so we go regionally or other places. We usually get outside and do that.
Do you have a favorite date night restaurant in town or locally area?
We like Gray's. We like local taco.
Yeah.
So.
Well, speaking of local taco, I think you are actually part owner or the owner of Local Taco, right? Want to speak to that a little bit, or how did that come about, actually?
I'm one of the three owners, yeah.
Okay.
So it was my son's idea. It turned out to be a brilliant idea, and everyone thought we were crazy, particularly me.
Yeah.
But I thought, well, let's give it a whirl. And it worked out really well. We bought the building and renovated it. It's one of those renovations. That was really one of the first commercial properties I had. I had one other maybe. And it just had a good run. People have been good to us, and the partners have all stepped up and done a great job. I'm really not as involved in day to day, so I can't take hardly any credit for anything there.
And I think that speaks to your earlier point of commercial properties either doing fantastic or not doing well at all, because I know where it's at, obviously down there on campus, and obviously to someone who's not been there, that seems like, oh, this would be an easy, sure win location for something. But as you and I know, there's been many a restaurant on that strip in that block that have come and gone quickly. So to that earlier testament, you definitely hit a home run there, and it's been good. But
right, we celebrated 10 years last year, and
it's been 10 years already. Wow,
10 years, and so that's pretty good longevity for that stretch there.
Yeah, interesting. First car you owned, what was that?
Oh yeah, Ford Pinto.
Okay, so wish you had it. Do you still wish you had it?
No. It went off a cliff somewhere, I heard. And,
okay.
It's a humble little car, but I thought it was cool at the time.
Well, Dave, I appreciate your time today. I mean, joining us here on the show. I mean, any parting words or things of advice before we go?
No, I find real estate fascinating. That's partly why I'm involved in, and finance for that matter, how things work together and stuff. Yeah. And so I've enjoyed it, and I still do. And so I really encourage people to look at it carefully and kind of go in with their eyes open when they jump into it. And
I appreciate your obviously wealth of knowledge and kind of being able to mentor other people, or if we have questions, I know I'll come to you in certain things and things like that. I know if I have future questions, I can give you a call. So I appreciate that. And I think it's a good point, too, as far as, again, asking people for help or something like that, or if not just on the financial side or financing side, it's obviously just advice side as well. So I'm happy to do that and answer people's questions. Well, Dave, appreciate it. Thanks for listening to the show today. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast, and we look forward to having everyone next week for another awesome episode of the Keys to the Commonwealth podcast. Thanks, Dave. Thank you.
To learn more about this podcast, visit our page at keystothecommonwealth.com. To connect with Landry regarding insuring your investment portfolio, email Landry at novainsuranceGroup.com or call 859-687-2004.